Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our monthly webinar series, Beyond the Field. I am your moderator, Amanda McLean, the Farm Management Specialist here with North Dakota Farmers Union. Thank you again, as the intent of these webinars are to bring you the latest information and have an in-depth conversation with our guest speakers. These webinars are held the third Thursday of every month at 10 a.m. Central Time. Today's topic, we will be covering North Dakota Farmers Union legislative update with Lance Gaby and Ryan Gregg. July's webinar will be conservation planning with the NRCS state specialists, focusing on EQIP and CSP. A few housekeeping tips before we get started, as everyone is on mute, but at any time, if you have any questions for Ryan or Lance, please feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A. We will also have time at the end of this webinar to ask them questions. As I said, this webinar is being recorded. If you want to rewatch it, you can find it by going to YouTube and searching North Dakota Farmers Union. That's where you will also find our previous webinars. And we ask at the end of this webinar that you please take the exit survey. It really helps us build the content and improve these webinars. With that, I would like to introduce our guest speakers. First, we have Lance Gaby, who serves as the agricultural strategist for North Dakota Farmers Union, where he works on state and federal policies on behalf of the organization, including as a registered lobbyist during the 2025 legislative session. He recently joined North Dakota Farmers Union, bringing 3 decades of experience in policy, agriculture, government, and management expertise. His previous roles include serving 2 terms as North Dakota Land Commissioner, the Deputy Chief of Staff and Agriculture Advisor for the Governor, and the later directing the North Dakota State Lottery. Also joining us is Ryan Gregg, who is a legislative specialist for North Dakota Farmers Union, where he works as the legislative team on state and federal advocacy efforts. His previous work comes from Washington, D.C. as an insurance trade associate and on several politic campaigns. With that, I will turn it over to you, Lance and Ryan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Gregg. So initially, for starters, me and Lance are going to go over some of our legislative priorities and outcomes. So back in December at the NDFU's convention, we had 4 special orders. The first special order was a completion of the 2025 Farm Bill, an extension of the 199A tax deduction for cooperatives, property tax relief and reform, and then there were some other state legislative priorities. Now I'm going to give it to Lance to outline the state legislative priorities.
So our session today and our conversation that we'll be focusing this webinar on is really those state priorities and the efforts of North Dakota Farmers Union on addressing the priorities as outlined in the special orders of business. Our 4 key areas that we spent most of our energy on behalf of North Dakota Farmers Union members are our property tax relief and reform. That was certainly a focus of the entire session from the first days to the last hours of the legislative session, and we were involved in every step. Ryan will talk about our efforts on value-added agriculture and enhancements and incentives to help bring more in-state processing and adding value to North Dakota products. Rural infrastructure and roads and bridges and water infrastructure will highlight, and also closing it out with a conversation about the rural quality of life, where our primary focus is this legislative session. So starting right in with property tax relief, as I mentioned, it was certainly has been a topic for the last several years. The governor, even though newly elected, made it a key priority, put it as part of his budget that he presented to the legislature on property tax relief and how it would be delivered. We spent a lot of energy trying to make sure that agriculture was included in that conversation, and the proposal that the governor proposed was specifically for residential property tax relief for primary residences. He talked about adding to the existing property tax relief. You can go to the next slide, Ryan. The focus of adding value, to have property tax relief for residents was definitely the focus of the governor and the legislative leadership. Farmers Union spent a lot of energy trying to have that conversation be broad-based, that all property tax types, payers, farmland, ranch land, commercial property would all get some of the relief that was being considered. So there's a number of different ways that that was approached. There were bills to do buy downs of the school mills for both agriculture and all property. There was proposals to adjust the valuation formula and how the assessed value is determined. And of course, I already mentioned the primary residence credit, primary residence tax credit that was got a lot of attention. We also, of course, spend a lot of time and resources making sure that the exemptions agriculture already enjoys, if you will, stayed in place. The fact that primary farm residences of active agriculture producers are exempt from property taxes, and that farm structures are exempt from property taxes certainly was highlighted as we discussed the need to extend property tax relief. A number of urban dwellers feel like that's already a decided advantage over their counterparts in the cities. The other topic that comes up a lot is how the valuation of farm and ranch land is determined. We, of course, have a productivity index formula. It's a combination of soil types and crop mix and crop values that is used to determine the assessed value of farm and ranch land, and that helps flatten the peaks and valleys of valuation, and that's definitely an advantage that we have over city dwellers that might see some sharp increases in valuation, even though they don't necessarily gain that in their bank accounts. So jumping into some of the specific bills that we spend a lot of time on, before in the first half of the session, we worked closely with Senator Robert Erbley to do a specific agriculture land buy down for the mills that are paid for school district support. And this is probably where we first noticed the big highlight of an urban-rural divide. The bill was agriculture focused, and in the Senate, it was debated at length the day before the recess for the crossover break in late February, when they all take a few days off from the first half and the second half of the session. And the debate on the floor was pretty strong. We were a little frustrated by the us versus them attitude, and that bill failed on a tie vote, 23 to 23. And of course, you have to have a majority for a bill to pass, and we were not successful doing that for this specific buy down. There was another bill, 1168, that would have done a similar buy down, but for all property types. It would have bought some of the mills that the locals pay for school districts. The state would have covered those mills instead. That bill lasted until the last few days of the session. It was defeated in the very end in favor of the primary residence tax credit. Another concept that was debated the entire session was a change in the valuation formula. There's a formula on the percentage of assessed value that's used to calculate the property tax value, and there was some changes in the background of the formula that were proposed, but that too was defeated in the very end. So the resulting outcome, well, thanks for the slide here. I forgot, this is the argument that we were making with the case of farmers and ranchers paying a lot of the property tax. This is a map that our colleague, Matt Perdue, who I should have mentioned at the outset, Ryan and I are just 2/3 of the team that spent a lot of time in the legislature. Matt Perdue was, of course, our lead on that, but he is, as many may know, resigning at the end of the month to pursue some interests, and so he's not part of this presentation, but he certainly was very active in all these policy objectives we're talking about today, including putting together this map. And what this map is a highlights the percentage of property taxes paid by agriculture land in these respective counties. So the darker the green, or the darker the shade, the more of the percentages in those counties are paid by farm and ranch land. So for example, in a Sioux County or Slope County, Sheridan County, lion's share, 85 and 90% is paid by agriculture or landowners. Whereas of course in Cass County, Grand Forks County, Burley County, the percentage is much lower as the value is largely picked up by commercial and residential owners. But what we highlighted for legislators as we argued that agriculture deserves some property tax relief is that 1.6% of North Dakota's population is farmers, but they pay nearly 16% of the property taxes because it's so dominated in our rural areas. So in 42 counties that are on this map of the 53, farmers pay more than residences, and in 30 counties, ag pays more than all other property classes. So that was the argument we made, and with our other ag groups, spent a lot of time and energy promoting that, but in the end, we didn't pull it off. So the bill that did pass, and this was in the last days of the session, is called a primary residence tax credit. There's already an existing resident tax credit in law, and with that, it's currently $500. The legislature expanded it to $1,600 per year, and it applies only to primary residences. So if you have your lake cabin or a recreational property, that doesn't count, but you can get it for your primary residence, and people are able to apply for it for the subsequent year to get a credit on their taxes, and the state will pick up that $1,600, up to $1,600 for each of those properties. The other big piece of the bill that might change things for political subdivisions, schools, counties, and townships is they did put a 3% cap on the growth from property taxes in those budgets. And so that's the reform part of this bill, is the fact that counties and the folks who deliver services will be challenged in any kind of growth as it comes with inflation or other costs of doing businesses. So some services may need to be cut. The funding for the entire primary residence tax credit comes from the legacy fund earnings. The legacy fund, of course, was created by the voters a dozen years ago or so to set aside 30% of oil and gas taxes, and $400 million of that income from that fund is what's funding this primary residence credit. And that should grow over time as the legacy fund grows, so will the income and interest from the fund. And so its potential future savings for property taxpayers could grow over time as those investments grow. The intent language is maybe helpful. There was a language put in the bill that said, we urge the next legislative session to consider broad-based relief, including for agriculture. I think our next slide talks a little bit about some of the future, what might anticipate. I think there will continue to be debate, including other property payer types besides residences. There's a mandatory study that will be done during the interim where the legislator, even though they don't meet, they do have committees that meet between legislative sessions, and there will be committees that will be reviewing both the options and how the other property types could be given property tax relief. There'll be some studies in effect of the effects of the caps that the schools, counties, townships, cities, and so forth, what their limitations might be, and how they are working with that new 3% annual cap. And of course, I mentioned legislative intent, that there's a intent is really that it's not a law, it's not a requirement, but it just suggests that future legislative sessions consider extending property tax relief more broadly. One thing we don't know if it'll happen, of course, there was a Measure 4 initiative measure in the last election cycle that would have eliminated property taxes, and there are definitely efforts underway in some circles to continue an initiative measure to potentially offer additional property tax relief, because there are a few that feel like what the legislature did, this $400 million, was insufficient. So we'll see. We don't know if that's how organized it is or how successful it will be, but there definitely is rumblings in the background of another ballot measure being proposed with a petition drive.
So our next priority was value-added agriculture. And so value-added agriculture was something that was in our special orders for this legislative session, and it has been in our priorities for previous legislative sessions as well. One of the big parts of value-added agriculture is the ad fund. Now, the ad fund was a $25 million fund that we got in the previous session, 2023, I believe. And they had spent $15 million for various grants and various value-added projects. We replenished that 15 million in new funding for the fund to bring it up to 25 million again. That 10 million is going to be used for infrastructure projects to fund that new development. So that's why that 10 million was still there in carryover. And so now the fund is back up to 25 million again, with 15 million for new projects and 10 million for infrastructure. Also, we have two post-production incentives for value-added ag. So these are things where they're lines of credit, 30 million for a new 450 million potato processing facility near Grand Forks, and 5 million for a possible dairy processing facility. Now, these projects are designed in such a way that shovels have to be in the ground, facilities have to be built. In the case of the potato processing plant, they get 15 million for the initial construction build, and then 15 million once they hit 50% capacity of that project. Now, for the two projects, the important thing to note, the potato processing facility, they already have a company in line, Agristo, that for that project. The dairy processing facility, that is more for looking into the future, that $5 million line of credit. They don't have any company currently lined up to access that credit. Also, they revamped the ethanol production incentive to target low carbon fuels. And then finally, locally led livestock development. Now, we were involved in this locally led livestock development quite heavily, and one of our biggest things was making sure we continued to have local control. So going back to July of last year, our Board of Governors actually agreed with us on this statement and actually approved the usage of counties to have their own locals odor footprint tool for zoning for livestock development. This was passed in the legislature, as well as a production facility sales tax, which is basically for when these production facilities are built, the sales tax from them will be shared with their local county and townships to help with infrastructure for those specific projects. For the locals zoning odor footprint tool, it is completely optional. No counties have to use this tool. It doesn't change anything unless they want to. It just gives them the option to use this science-based odor footprint tool for making setback rules. And the tool itself will be designed based off a Win-Rose model.
Sorry, I had a little trouble finding my unmute button. Transitioning into rural infrastructure, the focus moved a lot to enhancing investments in rural infrastructure. As one of the legislators who helped organize the new rural caucus mentioned, everything that North Dakota produces, whether it's cows or wheat or oil or gas, starts on a dirt road or a gravel road someplace. And so the state has a responsibility to make sure that that infrastructure works and it is able to function to help continue our economic activity in North Dakota. The DOT budget was where we ended up spending a lot of our focus, a lot of our energy. Traditionally, the DOT budget is essentially largely funded, or only funded really in the old days, so to speak, with fuel tax on gas and diesel and on motor vehicle registrations. And there's been a growing trend to supplement that with other dollars. 25% of the legacy fund earnings, so around $160 million, has been added to the DOT budget. Most of that going to the rural areas. There's $143 million nearly of oil and gas tax income that's been supplemented into the DOT budget. So the $2.7 billion budget is a combination of state highways, but also grants, flexible transportation grants, and flexible funds that are need-based for cities, counties, townships, and transit. There was also a strong focus on the needs to repair bridges. There's better than $1 billion backlog of bridge repairs that need to be done in the counties across the state. So 50 isn't go a long ways, but the logic behind that, $40 million number was that is about the extent of the expertise in construction crews that can install and build bridges. So it's until the ability to make them exist in the state, that's about the amount that could happen. The bottom line is that there's a lot of more funds for transportation in rural areas through both the formula and what this shows is the Highway Distribution Fund, which is a statutory money that goes based on a roads formula or how many miles you have, how many size of your population, size of the cities, and so forth. And so this is a traditional model that is in state law, but they supplemented this with the grant dollars, with those oil tax dollars and the legacy fund earnings to be able to distribute it on a discretionary basis where the needs exist. And so it's maybe a bit of a result of my earlier comments that there's a rural-urban divide in terms of the property tax relief. I'd say it shifted after the agriculture was unsuccessful at getting the uh, property tax relief, that let's make an investment in rural North Dakota, and they did that largely through the funds to the DOT. The next slide shows a better breakdown of how much is going to each of those sectors. So about $500 million is specifically going off the state highway system into the counties, townships, and cities. This number is a combination of both the formula dollars, meaning based on miles or of roads, and as well as the grant dollars or flexible grants. So it's definitely a nice enhancement that we can see uh, investment in North Dakota roads. There was a bit of a threat to the Prairie Dog um, Operation Prairie Dog Fund. This is at one time was being considered cut down or cut off. Operation Prairie Dog is a bit of a funny name, perhaps. It started 6 or 8 years ago as a way to transfer some of the oil and gas income from extraction taxes historically had been delivered predominantly to the oil and gas producing counties. And there was a shift, and it was called Operation Prairie Dog, just as a moniker, not really uh, sure why the name came about, but it just helps people keep track of that project. And there was some talk of this program going away and being replaced with the DOT funding, but it did remain in the end. So there remains $160 million that'll be distributed to both oil counties and non-oil producing counties across the state. There was a bit of a threat in another bill that was proposed by a few legislators who were frustrated about the progress of pipelines and transmission lines through other parts of the state. And there was a bill to propose that counties or townships that rejected having some energy corridors through their areas would not be eligible for Project Prairie Dog money. The language was a little bit strange. It said if it interferes or unreasonably restricts or conflicts with those energy projects, then you don't get the Prairie Dog money. We did successfully oppose that bill, said, hey, there's local control involved here, and people have the right to help design what the zoning is for where they live. And in the end, we were able to reject that bill. But there was a bit of a momentum on that effort to in the background, it was called a blackmail bill, and it kind of was, in terms of, if you don't step up, we're going to take away money from you. But we did shut that effort down. Shifting a little bit to water, certainly a focus on roads, but there's also more than $500 million invested through the Water Commission in water infrastructure. Certainly, there's major projects, Fargo flood control, Red River Valley water supply, Minot flood control are big parts of it, but we were able to keep a continued focus on rural needs like rural water systems, regional water systems, the cost share for water resource districts for legal drains and conveyance of water. We're able to reduce some of the bureaucracy on livestock water assistance. Previously, you had to be rejected by USDA funding to put in rural wells or solar wells or water distribution for pastures. Now the state said you can come to us first, and they'll do some cost share to help bring water to pastures that might be in otherwise dry areas. There was past several years, there's been a economic modeling required for drain projects and for water resource districts that wanted to do some enhancements or building maintenance drains. And the state was requiring a kind of burdensome economic analysis tool to make sure it was of value, and it was causing a lot of hand-wringing for a lot of water resource districts. The legislature did decide to put a pause on that economic analysis modeling, and they will study it during this next interim session. Before the next session, study that modeling. There's several water studies that'll be probably more prominent than agriculture studies during the interim, as a proposal to shift water resource districts from county boundaries to boundaries based on the watersheds or the perimeters of a drainage. We'll see where that goes, because it would certainly be definitely a reorganization of water resource districts and how they're put together and how they're taxed and so forth. And there's also a pretty broad study. It started out as just an evaluation of nuisance wet areas and how they're taxed and how they're regulated. And throughout the session, it got amended to include inundated lands and sovereign waters and taxation, and how land is reacquired if like a Devil's Lake situation, the water goes down, who owns the land that was submerged and how it is reacquired is all going to be part of a pretty major study that one of the interim committees will be undertaking. So we'll be certainly engaged and keep an eye on that on those studies.
So rural quality of life is our last issue, a priority. One of the things we've been hearing for definitely the past year, but probably for since I started here 2 years ago, is that our members really want us to focus on rural quality of life issues. And so this was an issue personally that I found particularly rewarding. And so our members at convention actually requested that we make this a priority. So rural quality of life investments. Now, this is just some of the bills we supported. We supported multiple other bills. One bill was 2390, which is rural catalyst grants. This is 2.5 million for child care centers, economic development, an initial, economic development, and it'll be distributed through the regional councils. There was also a bill for to support rural grocery stores for 1 million. Now that bill actually initially started off 2 million. This bill was in the previous legislature a 2 million bill, but there was a decrease in the revenue forecast, so the legislators decided to decrease it from 2 million to 1 million. The previous bill had much success, and this bill is just really building off that success. One thing to note about this rural grocery store bill, the legislature did tighten it up so that it only goes to support existing rural groceries first. So if you have a small rural grocery that's struggling, they get first. They get the first chunk of the pie from this 1 million. Then it'll go to new rural groceries to be developed. And then finally, regional council support. This this bill went through multiple different iterations, and we got it into the commerce budget for $2 million. And this will go to give the regional councils, money for operating and administrative expenses. We worked with the regional council a lot throughout this session. Also, for the Great Plains Food Bank, which is the only food bank that serves across the state, we got $5 million for a new distribution facility in Fargo. They need to expand. They're growing, and so they need to expand. And so we were able to get them a $5 million grant. And now looking ahead to future issues. One of the biggest things, as Lance alluded to, is that we need to start bridging the urban and rural divide. So currently, right now, agriculture contributes 25% to the state's gross business volume, which is $41 billion. And a big thing is it is 20% of all employment in the state, over 120,000 jobs. Of those jobs, 47,000 are directly related to production agriculture. The other 76 are indirect. Agriculture is the number one job in North Dakota. A lot of people in Fargo indirectly work with agriculture. And so going forward, we got to start making the point, and we will start making the point that, it's not just rural North Dakota that benefits from agriculture. It's also the urban areas like Fargo, which agriculture employs a lot of people, but just indirectly. And then also we have to start talking about the political realities going forward. So looking at these two things, back in 1977, legislators from Fargo only represented 11% of the state. Now they're 23%. Urban areas overall represent more than half of the state legislative districts, where previously the rest of the state represented far more than the urban areas. So one of the things we're going to have to do is start, linking up the agriculture to those urban legislators. A lot of urban legislators do not have any direct farm ties. They may have had a grandfather or great-grandfather, but they just don't have that direct connection anymore. So we're going to have to start making sure to educate them on farm issues and ag. And then finally, one of the things that was just recently stated in a legislative management meeting was that one of the main reasons to go back to special session is if there's a change in state revenue or a decrease in federal funding. Now, for federal funding, there is some expectation that federal funding will change. Currently, right now, I don't know how closely everyone is following the news, but there is a bill going through the Congress called reconciliation. This bill, the House version, would put North Dakota on the hook for roughly $22 million a year in SNAP benefit payments. Previously, North Dakota never had to pay any benefits for SNAP. That was not part of it. Now, if the House version passes, which it would be 22 million a year that North Dakota would have to pay, they would also see, based off the House version, a 128 million in Medicaid cuts. North Dakota currently spends 1.6 billion in Medicaid, but with this federal funding would be cut, and so if the legislature would either have to reduce benefits for Medicaid, or they would have to come up with another 128 million. Now that reconciliation plan is still up in the air. I would not say it's necessarily a jump ball. I would think they would probably pass something, but it is likely to have a lot of changes going forward from the House version. There is also another thing to talk about, which is decline in state revenue. Back in March, I believe there was a revenue forecast decrease, and this is because the price of oil is dropping. Over 45% of all state revenue comes from oil production, so that decrease will be quite significant going forward. And it's the price of a barrel of oil is forecasted to drop to $57 price per barrel coming forward. And so, finally, any questions?
And of course, that oil price is a continued challenge in terms of the geopolitical issues that are addressing or that are happening all over the world with Iran and Israel, and the momentum with the current administration to promote drilling activity in domestically. We see a lot of fluctuations in prices, but the state's budget is remarkably dependent on oil and gas income. And of course, if there's changes in the agriculture economy, that too will change the revenue picture for the state of North Dakota. So special sessions are not common, but they certainly could happen if there's a big impact to the prospective budget. So thanks for your time and attention. We appreciate your engagement here, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thanks, Ryan and Lance. As I said earlier, you can type anything into the chat or the Q&A, or I have unmuted everybody. So if you prefer to directly speak to Lance and Ryan, you just need to unmute yourself and you can ask a question. We will start with a question here for either one of you. So you guys both emphasize a lot of this urban shift from rural shift. How do you see that impacting that 3% gap will impact when you do the urban versus rural areas, and why is it important to be concerned about that?
You're probably talking about a 3% cap for the political subdivisions and what they can grow. It's kind of a to be determined. I was at a session earlier this week that the schools, counties, cities, townships organized to how they're going to implement the 3% cap and how the valuation will be determined. And I think it's going to be a markedly different impact on rural areas that their maybe only source of revenue is property taxes. Cities like a Bismarck or a Minot are able to have fees or sales taxes that can help generate their budgets, and so they can maybe, as they have growing needs or need to buy equipment or give pay raises or have services they want to deliver, they have other revenue streams. Whereas a McCluskey or a Bowman is more likely to only have sales taxes, or those rural counties as well only have only have property taxes as a revenue stream. So there is certainly likely to be some potential cuts in services as these caps are put in place, because just operational growth in terms of retaining employees, what it costs to do business for them to just deliver the services, take care of the roads, take care of their own needs. Certainly those expenses continue to grow, but the 3% cap is plausibly going to affect rural areas more than urban areas.
Thanks, Lance. Ryan, you want to add anything?
No, Lance got that one. Perfect.
All right. Another question. With more districts becoming urban, as you showed, how will that impact term limits?
Yeah, so two things to this. First off, a lot of the most experienced legislators are from rural areas, which I think is very important because they'll be termed out. But also, for the urban areas, a lot of the more experienced legislators in the urban areas are also the ones with the most farm connection, whether it be their grandparents or great-grandparents. As new legislators coming in, they're going to be younger and less connected to the farm or in agriculture. I don't know if you have anything else to add there, Lance.
Well, just maybe to remind people what the term limits are. Of course, the voters approved term limits recently, and it allows for legislators to only serve for 8 years in both of the chambers, and so it's a hard limit. It's a lifetime limit. Other states, like South Dakota, for example, I think you could take a year or two off and maybe run again, but not in North Dakota. So there are many legislators mentioned is that in 6 years we're all going to be different people, and so there's been lots of new faces, lots of new names. Definitely a change in the transition, change in the loss of institutional knowledge, I think, is going to be probably a key factor. And like Ryan mentioned, lots of those are from rural areas, trusted hands that we go to regularly. I mentioned uh, Robert Eberly, and there's certainly other legislators that are very much our go-to guys to help with agriculture and rural issues. And that'll be a challenge to get those folks replaced with people who are just as focused.
One more question that I have for both of you. So, as the property tax relief did not pass for agriculture, do you see that something similar coming up in future sessions, or how that will change?
Yes, I think there's a continued acknowledgement that agriculture pays a big share of the property taxes, and there's a acknowledgement that we need to extend property tax relief uh, to all property classes, not just residential. One thing I'll mention with the primary residence tax credit that did pass is that it's hoped that now everybody will have some type of property tax relief. So I think we need to think about our beginning farmers or the farmers who maybe have a off-farm income that made them ineligible for the farm residence uh, exemption, and that they too now will get some primary residence credit with this new program. But certainly it'll be a continued emphasis of ours to make sure that all property classes, certainly including agriculture, is included in future property tax relief efforts. So it's not going to go away. This is not a done deal. I think it'll be debated every session for the long term. And there's more money available. As I said, three-fourths of the uh, income from the legacy fund earnings is what's going to pay for the property tax relief. Well, that fund or that investment can grow over time as the legacy fund grows. So there'll be more dollars available, hopefully to help with all types of property tax relief.
And I would just add that it's going to be especially important to educate people on how property taxes are done for farmland in North Dakota currently, with whether it's production value or the exemptions for farm home buildings. It came up often that legislators would like to compare us to South Dakota and Montana, um, which is not ideal. So you need to stress the importance of educating them on why these exemptions are important to farmers.
And certainly one of those things is that farmers, because of their rural settings, don't have the same kind of services that uh, you probably aren't paying property or tax on your house on the farm because you're miles and miles from the fire department, or don't get your street cleaned or your garbage picked up. But so those are the types of services they're not getting. But it'll be a continued focus. So defense of what we have will be as important to us as trying to get into future enhancements for relief.
Well, once again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in or, um, speak. I guess I have a question more for you, Lance, being you have so much seniority, in North Dakota. So as we're most likely going to a special session here, how many times in the history of North Dakota have we had a special session?
Hmm. It's not common. There is always a special session after the census. So it's generally like in the uh, like '01 or 11 or 21, there'd be a special session that's specific to organizing for the redistricting based on the population arrangement. I would guess it's less than a dozen times in the history of the state that there's been a special session for other reasons. So it's a pretty rare occurrence, but the Senator Hogue, who's the majority leader in the Senate from Minot, listed 5 potential reasons that would prompt them to do a special session. Of course, we highlighted the budget impacts or the federal actions, but there's also court challenges or even a vetoed challenges that might prompt the Legislative Management Committee, which is essentially the board of directors between sessions, to activate a special session. They did reserve 5 days so the legislature could call itself back in for its limit under the Constitution limits them to 80 days, and they met for 75, so they could call themselves back and use those 5. Or the governor could call a special session if any of those circumstances arrives and have to revisit some of these policy or budget issues. Interestingly, if the governor calls them back in a special session, there is no limit on days, so they could come back and be there for a long, long time. But it's fairly uncommon, but I say nobody will be surprised if it happens this time because of the uncertainties and that we highlighted here.
Well, thank you, Lance and Ryan. I don't see any more questions coming in. So again, I want to thank you guys for both taking your time to present today. And thank you both for your hard work for lobbying on behalf of our members and farmers and ranchers in North Dakota. Again, thank you all for joining us today. And please take the exit survey once you are done with this webinar. And join us next month on July 17th when we'll have the state NRCS discussing conservation planning opportunities. With that, I wish you all a good day and thank you. Bye.